if they're going to realize that that no American is going to, I just don't believe it. Americans would never support a war for an island called Taiwan that's, 5 miles off their shore. Maybe, but I don't think so. The era of the American empire is over. This document is interesting to me, as I think it is to many around the world, not because it says anything new, but mostly because it makes explicit all kinds of things that we saw as implicit before. But when something is implicit, there's always the possibility you got it wrong, and they'll make an explicit statement that clarifies your mistake. Well, this document, what it does is give me altogether new confidence in my own judgment, because what I thought was going on, they now say it. So here's what it is, in my words. The era of the American empire is over. We can't do it. What you just read, we can't sustain a regulatory social welfare system at home and at the same time maintain 750 bases around the world, the biggest military by far, and all the rest. We can't do it. Or to put it another way, we lost the war in Vietnam, we lost the war in Afghanistan, we're losing the one in Ukraine. Hint, we can't do it. But because it is unacceptable in the United States to ever speak about this country as failing to achieve something, you have to transform that language into something else. Democrats do it in their way, and the Republicans just did it in their way. The Republican way is to blame it on, get ready, the elites, which is wonderful because it sounds as though they mean people other than themselves, which is a wonderful move if you think about it. The elites, and by the way, most of the post-World War II Cold War interventionism was proudly proclaimed to be bipartisan in nature. It was a truism of American politics. We disagree domestically. We don't disagree. We are, all of that was never true, but it was the idiom. All of that is thrown out in order to have the enormous pleasure of blaming the decline of the empire, not on capitalism, not on the revolt of the third world. A mistaken judgment by bad people, those elites, right? If a student writes a paper about an important historical event with that kind of an analysis, you give them a C-, right? Because this is too crappy. This is too simple-minded. What? It raises more questions than it answers. But for me, here's the message I take away. We recognize we can't do it. And we are, in that way, more courageous than any of the others that come before us, because they couldn't even come up with this weird way of saying it. So we're going to come up with our weird way. Bad elites made terrible misjudgments, and that's why we're in the pickle we're in. Not because our empire is unsustainable, none of that. Okay, so that's it. And number two, which you didn't quote, but which is, for me, just as important, is the long litany in that document, as in many of Mr. Trump's speeches, and likewise the speeches of Marco Rubio and Vance and the others, is this rewriting of history in which the post-World War II era is conceptualized not as the American empire, replacing all the British and the French and all the others, and the dollar, the currency of the world, and we drop the atomic bomb. I mean, we are the dominant, the superpower. No, no, no. It's all rewritten. Now it is we have been taken advantage of. The Europeans abused us. The Canadians and and we're going to put a stop to it. We're going to put America first, as though the people who came before us, by some terrible mistake, put Zanzibar first, or some other cuckoo nonsense that's coming out of their mouth. Notice the rewriting of the history. We are breaking out of the subordination we had been placed into. If you read European newspapers, which I do every day, you will understand they are slowly working their way to the same point of view in reverse, that they were always subordinated. And even though that's not true, they have more of a chance to make that argument than the United States does. But this then justifies we don't have to pay any more lip service to any notion that what the United States is about is to bring liberty, equality, fraternity, and democracy to a backward world. That's that's the bullshit of those who came before us. They can't do it, and it was a ruse. We were ripped off. Not gonna. So from now on, we do what's in the interest of the United States, and it's very important. We're not going to be held back by any of that old rationale. And that's why it is perfectly okay to shoot 85 people in fishing boats outside of Venezuela. You're showing we don't have to give them a lawyer, evidence, a jury, a judge. When I pointed out in one of the first times I addressed it, that here in the United States, when we arrest people convicted of drug trafficking, who have a lawyer and have a jury and have a judge, we never kill them. It's not a capital crime in the United States to be selling and buying drugs. You go to jail, you're going to have various penalties, but we don't kill them. Mr. Trump is demonstrating we don't need national law, international law. That's all part of, you know what that is? That's like DEI at home, a fake, bad, un-American nonsense that we have no use for. And I think that's basically what's going on. The only other thing I would add is that they know they can't do it on a global scale, but they still want to do it. So they've decided to resurrect the Monroe Doctrine and do it in Latin America. So you can see what I think is the same old American colonial policy, but now newly dressed up as if it were something new and different. By the way, on Venezuela, I think you should look for, or people should look for, the connection between all the posturing by the United States and the election in Chile. The election in Chile brought to power the son of a Nazi, who is the most extreme right-winger, makes Milei in Argentina look good. He admires Trump, and his basic claim is that the crime and other problems of Chile are the fault of immigrants, literally borrowing from Trump, with this different. He specifies the nationality of the immigrants. They are Venezuelan. And I think you're going to see some effort to mobilize these kinds of people, the Argentinians and the Chileans, because obviously he's got Mexicans and Brazilians, who are not going to play that game with him, so they're going to have to maneuver that. But we could see. Look, there's a line in the document that says we're not going to allow foreign commercial interests into Latin America, or words close to that. What does that mean? The Chinese have invested huge amounts of money in Latin America. Is he really going to? Are we then moving to a world in which China will be one immense bloc and the United States will be another immense bloc? The Europeans will dissolve into nothing, and we're going to be in a brave new world?
One of the points in the document is the era, here's a headline, the era of mass migration is over. And I looked at that and I said, well, by edict? I mean, because the era of mass migration is definitely not over, Richard. You have 60 million people are estimated right now to be on the move. That's greater than any number since the end of World War II, when people were on the move because their homes, their cities, their towns had been devastated by the magnitude of violence during World War II. They're on the move now because of wars, because of endless U.S. wars. They're on the move because they're not eating or they can't eat. They're on the move because of climate change, which is real and really impacting people. The proclamation that the era of mass migration is over, in a way, becomes sort of a semi-fascistic sort of call. And the point that you're making, that the new head of state in Chile, son of a Nazi, his campaign, as you said, is all about migration. It's becoming the go-to thing. If you look at Nazi propaganda in the sort of early part of the 1930s, the mid part of the 1930s, it wasn't only directed against Jews. And by the way, the Jews were identified as capitalists, like all the Jews were rich. But in terms of the real propaganda of the Nazis, it was against East European immigrants who had come and set up small businesses in Germany. They were different than the Germans. They were East Europeans, socially considered more backward. This hysteria against immigrants really kind of fed into the efforts by political parties of the far right to blame immigrants rather than to blame the real culprits, which in the case of Germany in World War, between the two world wars, was, of course, both the German capitalist class and then the victorious parties, the other capitalists who, quote, won World War I and imposed the Versailles Treaty on Germany. But we have this phenomena of fascistic or semi-fascistic propaganda. It doesn't mean Trump, I'm not saying the Trump administration is fascist. I don't believe that. I think the Trump administration's political program is going down the tubes, actually. I'm very optimistic that it won't work and it won't be accepted by the American people. It's not Germany 1933. But there is an element of fascistic propaganda and agitation that working class organizations, unions, community groups have to stand up and reject, because this blaming immigrants for everything that's wrong. I looked at, by the way, before I give the floor back to you, I just looked at the Wall Street Journal this morning, Richard. It says Madison Avenue is about to be emptied out by AI. Now, you know, the industry is the advertising industry accounts for like a huge part of the U.S. economy. It's $10 trillion in total economic activity. It supports nearly 29 million jobs. You know, it's not immigrants who are going to take these jobs. This is going to be AI, but AI under the rule of capitalism, where they don't give a damn about the workers who are working, including, in the case of Madison Avenue, people who have been pretty well paid up until now.
Yeah, I'm a little dubious about these projections. I mean, I don't know enough to be clear in my mind why, but there is something, there's a hype going on here, which in one way is, you know, is a truism. All these breakthroughs technologically get hyped. But I do want to remind people that we had a tremendous crash of the stock market in the early months of the year 2000, which we call the dot-com crisis, because the hype about what the internet could and would do far exceeded what it did. And I suspect the same thing is going to happen here. I think the fascism will come because of what you said. In other words, the more failure dogs this effort by Trump, the more desperate he and the people around him will become, and they've already shown. That's why this in Venezuela is so significant. I don't want to sound or frighten people, but a regime that can so easily kill people in those boats is not going to stop because those people are foreign. They're going to be able to say all the same hateful things about Americans, who also will have no lawyer, no jury, no judge. The president will designate them as the accomplices of those bad people we killed, and so they get the same treatment. And for me, the question then becomes, where will the American people line up when it's their turn to confront a serious, fascistic, desperate government? You know, Hitler knew in 1933, when the German capitalist class gave him the power, and they did it. There was a German Association of Business and Industry, had meetings, and decided that even though he was a crazy, he had a mass following, and that if they didn't make a deal with him, the socialists and the communists, who together got half the vote in Germany in 1932, would impose something on them. And they knew that what the communists and the socialists would impose was way worse than anything they could imagine with Hitler. So they knew what they were doing. They knew the chance they were taking. All the details, perhaps not. But they made an agreement. And why should you or I or anyone believe that the American capitalist class, it has been denying much of what's happened to it? The prognosis of American capitalism up against the Chinese is not good. I don't say that with any satisfaction at all. It is the case. And it's becoming more the case each passing week. And, you know, I used to think to myself, time is on the Chinese side, and I think they know it. I think Mr. Xi Jinping gives very moderate responses every time Mr. Trump does something weird. And I think it's not because they're smarter or because they have a different personality. I think they understand. As long as we avoid nuclear war, the basket is coming towards us. But the question is, I don't think Americans are stupid. They figure it out too. Then what? Then what? This is a retreat. You know, retreating to Latin America, whatever else you call it, is a retreat. If they mean it, if it's more than just words, if they're going to give up, if they're going to realize that no American is going to, I just don't believe it. Americans would never support a war for an island called Taiwan that's, 5 miles off their shore. Maybe, but I don't think so. And so the question is, can they hold on at least for a while here? I studied, for my doctoral dissertation work, I studied the British Empire in its final decades. It engaged one fantasy after another how it was going to preserve the whole empire. It was, and each of them in turn got a lot of attention. None of them worked. And, it was relentless. the colonies became a commonwealth. The idea that that would change it changed nothing. You know, the Commonwealth barely exists now. You know, the old colonies are places where King Charles can visit and a lot of little children bring him flowers. Other than that, it's all gone. It's all finished. And the horror of Gaza is, for me, the horror of a kind of colonialism, settler colonialism, that worked in the 17th and 18th century. You could do that with Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, Canada, and the US. But you can't do that now. That ship has gone. The world is awash in anti-colonialism. You can't then say, well, we don't care. We're going over there and we're going to do to the Palestinians what those other white people did where they went. You can't do that. Or to put it another way, the only way to do that is to make the ethnic cleansing genocidal at a time when the whole world bears witness to what you are doing. For me, it is a sign. If you don't understand where you are in the historical process, you're going to make mistakes. Look, you're going to make mistakes in any case, but your mistakes are going to be world-class mistakes because you just pretend that the historical movement doesn't pertain to you. You're the great exception. No. That right back there goes, I'm the great exception. I'm going to practice running and I will leap over the Empire State Building.
大家好，我是主播周玉琴。很多的朋友告诉我们，太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌帮助了睡眠品质。原版的太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌，它添加有超级食物羽衣甘蓝，健康再加分。而有睡眠困扰的朋友们，赶快选择蓝色包装这一款晚安加强版，绝对是更有感。每日克菲尔，时刻美好 ，Good Feel Good。请上快点购为健康下单，而且要记得输入推荐代码，有额外的折扣优惠。太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌基础版、晚安加强版，新包装改版，内容不变，抽取更方便。要吃就吃最好的。